Glen Slater. He is the Associate Chair of the Jungian and Archetypal Studies program, where I am core faculty. He's been a faculty member at Pacifica for 23 years. And maybe a little bit, as a young man, he was mentored by Robert Johnson. And the readings of C.G. Jung have been with him since he was in his early 20s. And he worked with James Hillman on one of the significant volumes of his uniform edition, Senex and Puer. So he has an amazing touchstone, direct touchstone with a number of individuals who are central to depth psychology. And one more thing. As a hermeneut of the soul dedicated to the depth psychological ethics, that is, a reverence for the sacred and consciousness, Glen is necessarily drawn to the shadowy pools that inevitably gather in the corners of our awareness, individually and collectively. And it is this acuity for and sensitivity to the shadow and technology that has drawn Glen's attention for a number of years, and which he will share with us today.
Good to see you all. I'm kind of glad I got to go at the end. So I'm presenting my talk in 5 parts. Out of our minds. What's astounding about today's technology is that its omnipresence is accompanied by a commensurate lack of critical thought about what it is and where it's taking us. As the technologist Brian Arthur puts it, we have no agreement on what the word technology means, no overall theory of how technologies come into being, no deep understanding of what innovation consists of, and no theory of evolution for technology. Technology poses some of the most pressing questions we've ever faced. What are we doing to the earth? How are we changing human nature? Will our inventions destroy us? Yet somehow it resists being questioned. It resists mindfulness. Knowing the shape of this resistance, where our thinking is blocked, I think marks the start of having a more conscious relationship with what we're bringing into this world, which might just be one of the most important things we ever do. So first, these resistances. Technology instills itself in our minds as an intrinsic and therefore unassailable aspect of life with inevitable outcomes. This formularization stops our thinking in its tracks. We have the intuition or idea there's something intrinsic and given about this impulse to innovate and invent. There is. But not understanding how this impulse is seated in the human condition, we tend to think our innovations and inventions are also intrinsic and given. They aren't. So the drive to create, which is baked in, needs to be distinguished from what we create, which isn't. It is the failure to make this distinction that generates the feeling of inevitability about what's to come, and this becomes a barrier to conscious exploration. Second, when we do begin to consider technology, we often fall into idealization or demonization, and both are forms of avoidance. We're swimming in utopian and dystopian fantasies. But we rarely follow these fantasies down into their psychosocial foundations. We bathe in these popular renderings without reflection on what they reveal about our psyches. To think technology will either solve all our problems or become our ultimate problem without grappling with what fuels these thoughts is yet another way to avoid hard thinking. Third, another common response tries to cut this polarization down the middle to claim technology is something neutral, an inevitable end product of scientific discovery, a mere application of knowledge. No doubt we've all held this view at some point. The problem is, it's wrong. Technology isn't bootstrapped to knowledge because it gives rise to knowledge just as much as it results from knowledge. And if we've learned anything in over a century of psychology, phenomenology, and social criticism, it is that ways of knowing are never neutral. Seeing the earth as a resource and life as data can't be separated from the inventions that fulfill these visions. Fourth, the notion of neutrality is related to the erroneous idea that technology is just a tool to pick up or put down, use or misuse. This moves our focus to the devices themselves, right? To the level of instrumentality, leaving behind what brought them into being in the first place. The innovator turns whatever knowledge they have into whatever instruments they can. What the world then does with them is for everyone else to figure out. Market forces can take care of it, which is really our contemporary version of letting God decide. This is mindless. Scientists use the metaphor of a black box when they want to describe some highly complex system that few understand in any detail. They only grasp what it does. Well, technology is doing an awful lot. Yet it is itself a psychosocial black box that few are really prepared to look into and try to understand. As the virtual reality pioneer Jaron Lanier puts it, it is impossible to work with information technology without also engaging in social engineering. I think we've just heard a bit about that. Our work resonates with deep philosophical questions. Unfortunately, we've proven to be poor philosophers of late. We make up extensions of your being, like remote eyes and ears, webcams, mobile phones, and expanded memory, the world of details you can search for online. These become the structures by which you connect to the world and other people. These structures, in turn, can change how you conceive of yourself and the world. We tinker with your philosophy by direct manipulation of your cognitive experience, not indirectly through argument. For both the consumer and the technologist, then, technology advances with a startling absence of deliberation. It is mindless in that it operates beyond psycho-spiritual deliberation, free of careful reflection and existential concern. Little wonder we often consider it soulless. Yet, there's a strange reversal in this narrative. For technology, it turns out, is actually all about the mind and all about the soul. It is almost entirely about relating to our deep nature. So the unthinkingness of technology is, ironically, an unthinkingness about ourselves, about what and who we are, which may be our least favorite topic, broadly speaking, right? Because it raises questions about some of our most ingrained ways of being in the world. After a decade of looking at these things, I want to share with you what I've discovered and what others have come to understand about this internal character of technology, in order to move its key problems from out there to in here. My aim is to undo the notion of innovation as something beyond our influence and kindle a feeling of responsibility for the unprecedented changes to our existence now underway, especially the push towards the so-called posthuman existence. I think this prospect of merging with our machines, which many see as inevitable, is actually the result of a monumental failure to be more conscious of what we're doing. A failure to lift the lid on the black box of technology. Creativity unbound. A future that hinges on algorithms and artificial intelligence is just the cover story. Whether we choose to recognize it or not, what is to come will be a lot more about, apologies to Mike Elliott, the archetypal basis of mind, sometimes known as the poetic basis of mind. That is, it will be about structures of thought and patterns of psychic life, for these shape our views of reality, and what we create stems from these views. You might say, of course he's going to tell us it all comes back to archetypes. But this Jungian term is just a means of describing the essentials of human nature and how they shape our understanding of existence. More pointedly, for where I'm headed here today, archetypal patterns and values lie at the heart of artistic sensibility, cultural imagination, and spiritual vision. These are the things that may turn out to be what stops the techno train from running off the rails. Let's step back. Technology, at its root at least, is a particular form of the creative impulse or instinct. It is itself archetypal. Yet, as with any primary impulse, the rest has to do with the way it enters conscious awareness, how it's enacted in the world, how it's also related to other primary impulses. And this is where the technology story gets strange and comes to assume an outsized role in the human story. The Greeks referred to the root of technology as techne. We've heard that term today, used and misused. A kind of crafting, right? But one that stayed related to the perception of natural order and the understanding of the cosmos. That is, crafting was originally tied to a perception of the deeper patterns of being imagined as gods. In psychological terms, crafting grew out of an archetypal vision, one impulse among many, inseparable from an array of ultimate values. As Heidegger points out in his famous essay, The Question Concerning Technology, techne was originally responsive to the gods, or to being, capital B, as he calls it. Modern technology, right, by contrast, is much more of a willful imposition, or at best, a harnessing of nature. It's a phrase you often see in definitions of technology. Heidegger isn't writing about the obvious advance in power and complexity of technology. He's describing a shift in its essential character, as well as its role in relation to other parts of lived experience. Whereas ancient technology was cooperative, rooted in a reverence for nature, a sense of divine principles, modern technology assumes a godlike position of power and has a masterful and exploitative posture, largely because of an absent recognition of these principles. Now, this distinction that I'm drawing has been stated in a number of other ways. The contemporary historian Yuval Harari has a nifty formula for the propensities we've cleaved apart. In his book Homo Deus, he writes, "Modernity is a deal. All of us sign up for this deal on the day we're born, and it regulates our lives till the day we die. The entire contract can be summarized in a single phrase: Humans agree to give up meaning in exchange for power. The prominent 20th century critic of technology, Mumford, writing through the late industrial, early post-industrial eras, returned constantly to this imbalance between technical power and sources of meaning. He wrote, "Our situation today calls for development of the repressed and dwarfed functions of the human personality on a sufficient scale to restore the ecological balance," it's going to be a key term for us, "that techniques has disrupted. We must reverse the order of development which first produced the machine. We must now explore the world of history, culture, organic life, human development, as we once explored the non-living world of nature. We must center attention on quality, value, pattern, and purpose, as we once centered attention on quantity, on mechanical order, on mass and motion." Jung sensed the same collision of values, writing in the essay The Spiritual Problem of Modern Man about the Promethean sin of the industrialized world. So that is always looking forward, right? Placing our faith in what the rational mind's poised to create while effectively dismissing the past and its ancestral wisdoms or archetypal roots. The picture behind all of these reflections is one in which the building of civilization is detached from the imaginings of culture. William Blake referred to this as the divide between ratio and vision, between science and the sacred. Yet spiritual factors have a strange way of re-entering the picture. We've been hearing about, particularly last night and this morning. And as Susan Bordeaux puts it, the godly intellect is on the way to becoming the true deity of the modern era. The problem is that this divinization of a certain narrow form of intelligence desacralizes and thus effectively devalues almost everything else. This exchange of power for meaning, mechanical advance for humanistic understanding, and so on, has found its perfect maintenance system in the STEM emphasis in education. This emphasis is now firmly planted in the shallow yet limitless stream of information, leading to fabulous careers in data management and mainstream cognitive psychology, but it makes a poor program for deepening our capacity to understand. The arts and humanities are no longer seen as essential, or they're forced to sneak back in. Given modern history and how much needs to sneak back in, however, it may not be the right acronym. STEM seems largely geared toward a worldwide competition in human robotics, which mainstream psychology is also aiding and abetting by promoting mechanistic models and neurochemical reductions of the mind. Our classrooms are offering little preparation for life and no grasp of the human psyche. Now, fittingly, it was to art that Heidegger turned in searching for a viable path forward for technology. For it turns out that art was once also called techne, and as he proposes, it is the principal means of maintaining the connection between crafting and the gods, or archetypal values, especially in the form of poesis. Apologies to Mike Elliott. He writes at the conclusion of his essay, the question concerning technology, the more questioningly we ponder the essence of technology, the more mysterious the essence of art becomes. The closer we come to the danger, the more brightly do the ways of the saving power begin to shine, and the more questioning we become. And I think this is something to hang on to for this conference. For questioning is the piety of thought. Raising questions, though, is difficult, if not impossible, when the ground beyond modern technoculture keeps shrinking. What is it, then, that's going to shape and direct the creative impulse if the craft and art of techne continue to be decoupled? In essence, Homo faber, man the maker, has been decoupled from Homo sapiens, the so-called wise man. And the task we face is to put them back together. Where woman belongs in the picture may well be a crucial part of this. Today, we talk about the Anthropocene, right? Which is a rather elevated term for Homo faber reshaping the earth in questionable ways. This awesome power is at the same time necessitating a philosophy of co-creative responsibility. So our newfound godlikeness, right, comes with a manual for conscious use. But on what basis is this manual going to be written? Now we're doubling down on our fabrication efforts by gearing up to alter our own nature, merging our godlike intelligence with that of our own artificial offspring. Shouldn't our track record give us pause? And if we turn ourselves into gadgets, whence comes the consciousness for our instrumentality in the greater scheme of existence? Archetypes and algorithms. You no doubt see how I've arrived, right, at the theme of the algorithmic and the archetypal. At the core of our present post-industrial creative power is the control of data by means of algorithms, logical directives and mathematical formulators that run computers and make up the so-called neural nets of AI. For example, the algorithm behind Google's search engine is perhaps one of the most closely guarded formulas today. It's also Exhibit A in the outsourcing of our minds. The simplest way to think about how algorithms already shape our lives is to realize how the online world is not neutral. We talked a bit about this. It's curated. It's often manipulative, and now continually exposed to we're continually exposed to the degree to which it's exploitative, particularly in corporate and government use of personal data. Our brains may not yet be hardwired to the internet, but if, as the science fiction writer William Gibson suggests, we're entering an inversion of reality in which the cyber world starts to replace the actual world. And anyone who checks their Facebook multiple times a day is already effectively inverted. Then it's algorithms that are shaping and will shape our lived experience. The algorithm behind YouTube offerings was recently shown to tilt the viewer of political material towards more extreme content in either direction. This hasn't exactly produced a more informed citizenry. Arguably, Mark Zuckerberg now wields more political power than anyone on the planet. Our minds can effectively already be hacked. As we prepare to fully mate with our machines, how much are we going to wager we'll know how to keep the nefarious players from accessing our cyborg brains? How will we spot the Manchurian candidates and Stepford wives? They may already be among us. 2 centuries of technological prowess and the elevation of reason hasn't overcome the tendency to commodify everything within reach. How will we avoid our own commodification? It's a question Heidegger also asked in his paper back in the 1930s. I imagine some will argue that archetypes are simply algorithms of a biological kind. The way biology and psychology have succumbed to computational language is uncanny. It no doubt stems from somewhere. But archetypes are patterns that permeate many levels of thought and lived experience, shaping behavior and perception, channeling instincts, and forming rarefied symbols. They enter awareness through the emotional and the sensual, as much as the cerebral, and are more concerned with value than with logic. They anchor the narratives that move us and guide our meaning making. And at the risk of stating the obvious, they were created at the crossroads of the evolutionary process and the cosmic order, not Wall Street and the 101. The archetypal world, which is accessed through the preoccupations and refinements of the cultural imagination, through the language of myth and metaphor, keeps us connected to the past, constantly reminds us of the mind-body-world configuration, reminds us that that configuration is an ecology, and perhaps most crucially in this context, keeps our eye on the religious impulse, the constant search for ultimate solutions and ultimate significances. Algorithms are mapping our reality and sorting through every piece of personal data they can get their hands on. And we're sitting on the other side of our screens, constantly mistaking the map for the territory and turning larger and larger chunks of our lives over to the datification process. This is why Yuval Harari declares dataism, or Johnny used the term data colonialism, right? Same thing, to be the effective religion of our time. We've placed our faith in the reduction of life to data, and we have begun to let the data crunching machines make more and more choices for us, pointing to their impending role as the ultimate authority. We've all been converted, and we're attending a church we don't see because we've closed the archetypal eye and thus the faculty to make such things conscious. Think about this morning and the trickster. That's amazing to see the trickster at work in all this technology. The problem is we don't have the glasses for the trickster. We're not good in this culture for seeing that particular archetypal configuration. My question is this: can we hold this read on the course of history together with the fact that computers don't actually understand anything? Deep Blue may have bettered Garry Kasparov at moving pieces around a board according to a defined set of rules, but it had no awareness of what it was doing or why. All map, no territory. In Turing's famous test, the computer only has to appear to have a humanesque intelligence and pull the wool over the eyes of the judges to pass. Somehow the magic of the silicon chip combined with our own capacity to personify anything with a whiff of agency produces an illusion. This illusion, which effectively obscures the chasm between the algorithmic and the archetypal, will have us in the arms of robots in no time. In the movie Her, a man falls in love with his operating system, though it just happens to have the voice of Scarlett Johansson, providing a not insignificant enticement. The seduction is mostly accomplished by the access the operating system has gained to this man's entire history, as well as years of monitoring the way his online activity reveals his preoccupations and complexes. But it isn't until his virtual lover announces she's in intimate engagement with several hundred other people simultaneously that the spell is broken. So the next time you're conversing with Siri or Alexa, try being aware that they actually have no idea of what you're talking about. Whether it's the online world, cyberspace, virtual reality, augmented or enhanced reality, or the projection of understanding and even sentience on machines, the question becomes the same one. What parts of our experience are elevated and what parts are neglected? What skill sets and modes of relating to each other in the world are left undeveloped? How is the digital age balkanizing the human psyche? Mad scientist syndrome. So the picture I'm painting, right, is a picture of a split psyche, a mode of being in which there's very little connection being made between the making of things and the wisdom to do so, or between creativity and meaning, right? This picture is essentialized to the point of caricature in the mad scientist. We all recognize this figure, right? Devoted to their particular project or experiment in a way that leaves all other facets of life in the dust. Their conscious aims often come with a totalizing fantasy, and their unconscious becomes a monster. My favorite depictions are Rotwang from the Fritz Lang masterpiece, Metropolis, it's been mentioned, who is attempting to rebuild his lost love as a robot. And the experimenter in the original version of The Fly, who loses his head in his matter transfer machine and ends up with the head of a fly. Both display pivotal motifs of science fiction. The one attempting to animate some lost love, right, or soul image, the other suffering the return of repressed instinctuality, often depicted as the revenge of forgotten lowlife. This 1950 science fiction movies, there's bugs everywhere, giant spiders and radiation experiments gone berserk. Maybe we should call it the forced remembering of the lower rung of life. Often the mad scientist has suffered some kind of betrayal or loss, right? Hephaestus, anyone? So they ride their genius off into the fantasy of fabricating a better world. The mechanistic mindset and calculative intelligence that can make best use of it rise to the place of highest value and leave emotional intelligence and organic consciousness on the shelf. Like the AI he embraces as redemptive, and it is almost always he, mind and soul shrink to the level of a brain in a vat. Few statements epitomize this notion of swapping out evolved organic processes for artificial ones, then Google founder Sergey Brin's comment, "We want Google to be the third half of your brain." Google brain. Functionally, he may have already succeeded. His chief research scientist, the posthuman icon Ray Kurzweil, has said about the computing cloud, he feels less complete if cut off from these brain extenders. As social scientists have run experiments showing certain demographics would rather break a limb than be separated from their smartphones, and I think we heard about this more or less from Elizabeth, we appear to be getting in the same boat. Asked to rationalize this choice, these people say, at least in the hospital I could remain connected. In tracking down this experiment, and yes, I Googled it, I came across a story that discussed smartphone loss in terms of Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. Now, Brin is smart enough to know the subtle implications of his statement, given that 2 halves make a whole, right? Something like 1/2 of our brain would need to be replaced. And there's no prize for guessing which half. Clearly, it's the left hemisphere that would fit in best beside the Google Home cerebrum. Right brain is not much needed in the data-driven world anyway. Now, this sounds like a bit of a joke, but not to the neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist, who suggests we may be creating a world that's shrinking right hemisphere function. He writes, "My contention is the modern world is the attempt by the left hemisphere to control everything it knows so that it is the giver to itself of what it sees." He describes this modern outlook as an over-explicitness in relationship to what needs to remain intuitive and implicit, depersonalization and alienation from the body and empathic feeling, disruption of context, fabrication of experience, and the loss of in-betweenness. So to the extent this is our psychic field, he's saying, is the extent to which we're changing the brain. I want to be very clear here. I'm not attacking scientists or technologists per se, especially those who are able to situate their disciplines in wider social, cultural, and humanistic contexts. I'm attacking the scientism, the scientism and technologism, the reductive thinking that devalues or excludes other kinds of critical understanding and approaches to the world, which has become a dominant creed and threatens to normalize mad scientist syndrome. I'm questioning the dataism we've all been sucked up into because it has this reductive, dissociated thinking standing in back of it and is leading to a very compartmentalized existence. Yes, I know, the isms are flying, right? But that's the point. As Jung argued, the gods come back as symptoms, and God returns in totalizing secular ideologies, with ultimate meaning promised but rarely delivered. To the extent that we're turning to technology for salvation and dissociating from other cultural forms and inner resources that foster an apprehension of being, capital B, and sense of ultimate values, we're all becoming mad scientists. Our eggs are increasingly all in one basket, that of our own ingenuity and computational intelligence, one that stands ready to steer our choices, guide our lives, and eagerly provide subsistence forms of companionship and community. So finally, Silent Spring again. Over 50 years ago, Rachel Carson, a biologist, looked into the idealistic embrace of pesticides and uncovered the indiscriminate annihilation of bird and insect species that marked the start of an ecological catastrophe. On the one hand, her work has become a touchstone for an environmental movement that may turn out to be a pivotal check on technological overreach. On the other hand, her work has also sparked a resistance movement that has been arguably so far even more consequential. I want to suggest to you today that we're entering another kind of silent spring, a silent spring of inner nature, as technology begins to enter our bodies and minds in an equally idealistic and thoughtless way, oblivious to the ecology of the human condition, if not the ecology of being itself. Now, I'm not going off on a huge tangent here, just to make a point. Most people trace the modern beginnings of AI back to the cybernetic theories of people like Norbert Wiener and John van Neumann, whose ideas gathered momentum at what are known as the Macy conferences, held from the mid-40s to the mid-50s. The aim of these conferences was to address the way computers might one day mimic the neurological functions of humans, how artificial and biological systems might overlap. Now, one important original member of that group was Gregory Bateson, an anthropologist and broad-ranging thinker who was a great advocate of unconscious processes and implicit ways of knowing, the kind of knowing that keeps us bonded to the mind-body world configuration. He eventually published his collected essays under the title Steps to an Ecology of Mind. Of course, the influence of Bateson's thinking on this group, focused as it was on the holistic, interactive character and unconscious processing of knowledge and understanding, did not last. And in a way, that absence has haunted the history of modern computing and the development of an artificial intelligence that has little in common with an ecology of mind and now threatens to usurp it. Apple's CEO Tim Cook recently told MIT graduates, "I'm not worried about artificial intelligence giving computers the ability to think like humans. I'm more concerned about people thinking like computers, without values or compassion, without concern for consequence." This is telling. He would seem to be someone in a position to read the trends. Even in the tech sector, the idea is out. Technology may be making humans more robotic. Perhaps even more telling, albeit anecdotal, resonating again with some thoughts this morning, according to some reports, tech insiders are having their nannies sign agreements to keep screens away from their kids. There's epidemic levels of depression, anxiety, and suicidality at Silicon Valley high schools and on an exponential rise among 10 to 24-year-olds everywhere. Digital nativism seems at least to coincide with psychic distress, as we heard from Aliyah. I'm not a Luddite. Technology will undoubtedly continue to grow and develop, but without our doubts and questions, if it can be created, it will be created, will continue to be the mantra, and will be continually working out the psychosocial implications after the fact. We seem to have just squeaked by with this clunky arrangement until now. But if we continue to think our minds are computers, and cyberspace is our new home, rushing out for a brain implant to keep us online 24/7 may not be far off. And at that point, our tether to what makes us most human, to the archetypal basis and ecology of mind, will show distinct signs of breakage. Now, if all this doesn't scare you, I'm not sure what would. People have always fallen under the influence of wayward political and religious leaders. Brainwashing's always a prospect. However, beneath this kind of artifice, there's always been a relatively stable human architecture of human response and value to return to and recover. But if we allow the algorithmic to eclipse the archetypal, walking back up the slippery slope may not be such an option. To conclude, posthumanism is best regarded as a helpful window into a possible future, reflecting back to us a pivotal present. In this way, we're moved to peer inside the black box of technology, which is, as I've attempted to show, the black box of the psyche. There we discover a fork in the road of creativity, one where civilization and culture, techne and art, are forged together, and one where they are not. Neo isn't just the one, he's the only. For we're all called to see through the matrix and wake up to the way machines are grooming us for commodification and using us as a resource. On the other side of this matrix lies an ecology of mind, the preservation and cultivation of which goes hand in hand with a co-creative responsibility and stands between the current era and the literal enactment of a posthuman warning dream. Thank you.